Good morning, good afternoon, or good evening, depending on where you are in the world. Welcome to today's webinar, Scaling Your Field Reimbursement Program with Confidence, sponsored by Cover My Meds and broadcast by Informa. I'm Brandy Fiddler, and I'll be your moderator today. We have a few announcements before we begin. This webinar is designed to be interactive. On the right-hand side of your screen, you'll find the Navigation Center. Here you can participate in attendee chat, submit questions for your speakers, or download resources. The slides will advance automatically throughout the event. If at any time you experience difficulties with the audio or advancing of the slides, simply press your F5 key or Command plus R to refresh your webinar console. If you experience technical issues, please type your issue into the Q&A area and we will be happy to offer one-on-one assistance. Toward the end of our webinar, we will ask you to complete our survey. Please take a minute to fill this out before leaving us today, as your feedback will provide us with valuable information on how we can improve future events. Now on to the presentation. Joining us today is Patrick Sadongo, Senior Manager, Field Reimbursement Services with Cover My Meds, and Kim Howard, Senior Manager, Field Reimbursement Services, Cover My Meds. We can begin the webinar, so take it away.
Thank you, Brandy. Hi, my name is Kim Howard. As Brandy just stated, I am a senior manager at Cover My Meds. I have been in field reimbursement services for the majority of my career, first starting off as a field reimbursement manager and then moving into management. I'm very passionate about helping brands navigate access challenges in a way that's practical and scalable. So I'm very excited about this webinar today and presenting to you how we can support the brands.
And I'm Patrick Sadongo, Senior Manager of Field Reimbursement Services at Cover My Meds. I spent the last 10 years working across patient access and reimbursement, helping build and scale field reimbursement programs that connect operations, product, and commercial strategy. Today, I focus primarily on partnering with manufacturers to navigate access challenges and turn field insights into more scalable solutions. I'm also extremely happy to be here and excited for the conversation that's coming.
Thank you, Kim and Patrick. Let's start by grounding ourselves in what field reimbursement programs are facing in today's market. Question to the speakers. Do you need a foundation of what an FRM is? Kim, can you kick us off?
Yeah, absolutely. So field reimbursement managers are an additional tool to be able to help provide education and support on that PA process from a provider perspective. So for us, early FRM programs, they're often tactical, answering coverage questions. They're following up on that PA status, and they're solving those access issues one case at a time. In today's market, they're managing the one constant we all are, and that's change. So payer complexities create barriers that need evolving solutions for the programs. We're seeing the continued change across payer dynamics, benefit design, specialty growth, and policy activity. So our FRMs must stay current on the changes, and the brands have to stay flexible. As an FRM program matures and the basics are in place, the focus shifts. It becomes less about reacting to each issue and more about how do we spot those patterns and trends that we're seeing. We could do that by asking better questions and building solutions that scale. That's why today's conversation is about. It's about what maturity looks like in practice and how Cover My Meds partnered with these brands to create solutions that could be replicated by your brand.
The most important thing and part that we see is growing toward maturity is ensuring that we're laying a firm foundation along the way. With our most successful programs, the theme that always keeps coming back is there's an established foundation of trust and transparency and shared vision. That is by far our greatest driver of long-term success. We have several examples of how we've seen this done in the past, and that's behaviors that both the brand and the FRM team have actioned on. One of those is when the brand becomes an internal evangelist for the FRM team, really ensuring that all of their internal stakeholders fully understand the shared mission. It's made it so much easier to implement change, gain support, and operate efficiently. Similarly, it's also helped us bridge gaps between their ecosystem partners and even really help them educate their internal teams on the role of the FRM. I would say that our most successful brands really see us as an extension of their own team and not just a vendor. That model supports joint planning, integrated workflows, and most importantly, transparency.
Patrick, I couldn't agree with you anymore. I've witnessed that as well from the brands that I support. And there's also habits that I've seen us implement that support the firm relationship foundation. Our team, starting with being earnest in upfront conversations that set that foundation for success. There's always going to be bumps when there's a launch going on, but what matters is how quickly you address them and how openly you talk about them. That's what builds that trust and keeps that momentum moving. The other piece I mentioned earlier, being open to new ideas and being flexible. The best solutions usually come when both teams are willing to say what is working, what's not working, and what needs to change. That's how you build a model that truly fits the brand.
Thank you, Kim and Patrick. So now we've discussed how to establish a foundation that will allow for future growth. Let's look at what that growth could look like for your brand. Patrick, we know that post-launch brands learn a lot about what their needs actually are, and they can then adjust to best address their needs. Can you tell us about how you've watched mature teams develop solutions for agile support needs?
Yeah, absolutely. So post-launch and as the brand grows, they generally have a better idea of what their needs are. So then it becomes a good time to start to evaluate what's the quantity of the FRMs that do they need? Where do they need to be deployed? Does it need to be, what's the appropriate mix of in-person, virtual, hybrid? Each has its benefit. So the key is determining which one. So when we're talking about in-person FRMs, we're talking about unmatched relationship building and hands-on support. Can't really replace the FaceTime when it comes to education and solutioning with the prescribers. That builds that rapport, that trust. However, because of the travel time, that FRM may struggle to have the same number of touch points as a virtual support FRM might. And additionally, there would be additional travel costs since they're going to be in person, which then brings us to the virtual FRMs. Those offer a broader geographic reach and a higher touch point volume. They can also serve to help support those brands that have an internal FRM team as well. So, for example, what that could look like is the internal FRMs would contact the Cover My Meds FRMs for areas where the Cover My Meds FRMs have more visibility. And that could be things like portal support. The other thing that can happen there, which we've seen, is sometimes the internal FRMs remove themselves from the conversation and allow the Cover My Meds FRMs to really step in for that patient support because of that critical line of sight that the CMM FRMs would have, and more education and visibility to the portal or other things of that sort. What we also see is a hybrid team, and so that is a blend of both. We see some internal that or we see a group that is in person and a group that's virtual, and really that just brings the best of both worlds. It allows a manufacturer to be dynamic with the way that they deploy, so balancing those offices that need an in-person touch and really need an opportunity to build that relationship that will then allow the virtual group to be a little bit more effective and really allow them to change depending on what the region is. And as those needs adjust, the hybrid model allows you to be flexible and really address growing needs.
Yeah, agree. I agree with that, Patrick. And I think you probably agree. That's why starting small and scaling with intention is so important, because oftentimes those newly launched or those pre-launched brands, they rarely know what size team they want long term, and oversizing too early can often create that inefficiency. So instead, we need to evaluate the needs at the program start and then continue to reassess as the program matures to ensure the team remains right-sided and effective. There may also be need for creative solutions. So we've supported a hybrid of these options and seen it be effective. We've supported a program that brought their field team in-house one week every month to really focus on calling providers with unsubmitted prior auths. That took them out of the field and gave them a specific focus for that week. And we found that to be very beneficial. And that kind of flexibility helps the brand expand and reach without losing the relationship value of the field. It allows for a growing footprint to be responsive while also continuing that, having that well-calibrated field team. So I think there's a lot to be said for which whether it's virtual, hybrid, or a mix of both would work for your brand.
Great. And it sounds like having an agile methodology is the best way to address our changing market. Now that we understand how to best establish the right team mix, let's talk about how teams address unique needs that brands may face. And we also know that each therapy comes with unique needs. Kim, tell me about solutions that you've seen your FRM teams implement to address market requirements.
Yeah, thank you. There's definitely one situation that comes to mind that's proven to be a repeatable model for us. We find that therapies that are often written at the long-term care facilities run into unique barriers that we don't see across all therapies. A lot of these facilities are still working through those manual processes of faxing paper prior authorizations, so their workflows look a little bit different, and that can sometimes slow the triage and create delays. And in that environment, a standard approach usually is not enough. So we can't just go in and train the offices to use the portal when that's out of workflow for them. They're not used to it. They're not familiar with it. So we've built a LTC focused FRM model. And that team has the same reimbursement foundation as the rest of our FRM programs, but it has the added training specific to the LTC workflows and the pace those facilities operate in. So for example, we know time is of the essence always across any of our programs. We want patients on therapy as quick as we can get them on, but even more so in the long-term care facilities. If the facility runs into any issue filling a med, they're not going to hesitate switching to another easier to fill medication. So it makes it very important for us to educate the offices early and often. We also find that faxing is very burdensome to the offices. You know, there's lost faxes, they don't see them, they don't get them in a timely manner. So we do see opportunities to improve workflow over time, and they see the benefit of using the Cover My Meds portal. Lastly, I would say we know that because of the access to the in-office specialty pharmacies, the LTCs are relying a little bit more heavily on the pharmacy to do a lot of the labor for them. So we've been able to build stronger relationships with specialty pharmacies and be able to support the office more effectively across the whole PA process. And in doing so, all of this has helped with the brand getting visibility by identifying where the breakdowns were happening, and then also being able to respond early to avoid issues down the road.
And Kim, I know you've worked with this team as well. How do you see this LTC strategy play out?
Yeah, there's a few examples, Brandy, that I can give you. So I'd say the first at a basic level, the kind of support that we provide helps build confidence within the office staff. Again, I mentioned some of them aren't familiar with using the Cover My Meds. They don't have a dedicated PA champion within this space. So oftentimes you may just be working with the patient's nurse directly who may have never even done prior auths before. So in many LTC settings, the teams, again, rely very heavily on the pharmacy. So when something falls outside the usual process, it can start creating a bottleneck. So we've worked with, for example, one office, they had a large number of incomplete prior authorizations, there were stalled reviews, and there were inconsistent outcomes going on. We were able to work with them to create a more structured training on workflow and portal usage, and the team felt much more confident after that, not in just submitting the request, but Also in understanding the status, knowing when to step in, when they need to move things forward. We also saw something similar in another facility with high staff turnover, which can happen both within LTC and any practice that we might be working with. And that turnover had reduced reimbursement knowledge, also creating delays. So we focused on, again, focused training on that prior auth workflow, documentation practices, and sustainment planning. And that team became much more proactive with doing their PAs in the future. That's really the value of that specialized support that we can provide. It doesn't just solve the issue in front of you. It helps us to build that capability so the process gets stronger over time.
Thank you. And I understand that since you've rolled out this model, you've rolled it out to other programs and seen success. And I love to talk about how the last 2 points we've covered are grounded in data and analytics. Throughout the year, you've worked with mature programs to ensure they are backed by insights that fueled targeted deployment and acute strategies. Patrick, tell me about how Cover My Meds has used data to drive strategy in 2026.
Yeah, so as programs mature and the data becomes quantifiable, it's critically important to have the higher level reporting and the ability to detect trends early. So from launch, we've always documented the interactions with the providers to have that one-to-one visibility. And so that micro view always is beneficial as a program evolves. But by leveraging CoverMed's expansive network, we're able to introduce territory impact reporting. And this approach provides a comprehensive view of the FRM impact across the journey and the territory level, and reporting on the PA touchpoints, denials, appeals, outcomes, and even the monthly workload per FRM. And when we're thinking about going back to that foundation of trust, with that, especially with the brand, when we're able to hand deliver some of those insights on a monthly consultative session, it really builds that trust. It shows that we are a partner. We are helping drive strategy for your team, reporting where we may see things that, need some adjustment. And so that trust allows us to have those conversations in real time, make pivots to strategy and team realignment and deployment, as we mentioned a little bit earlier. It's especially effective for mature brands that have medium volume or the larger FRM teams, because that territory to FRM support, it really brings meaningful pattern detection. It keeps a program very agile, very responsive. I think when we spoke at Informa earlier this year, there was a concept brought up about noise versus signal, and having this amount of data, we are better able and quickly able to identify what things do we actually need to action on against some things that might be one-offs. And so having that CMM data, that territory level, we're better able to provide those insights to our clients to allow them to really stay agile and responsive.
Well, thank you, Patrick and Kim, for a great presentation. We're going to move on to the Q&A portion of our webinar. And as a reminder, to participate in Q&A, just type your question into the text box located to the right of your presentation window. And if we cannot answer any submitted questions during today's webinar, we'll be sure to share them with our speakers who can reply to you offline. So I'll start with the first question. Either Kim or Patrick can start first. How do manufacturers balance the need for strategic insights with the day-to-day reality of reactive case management?
Oh, I'll grab that one, Patrick. That's a great question, Brandy, because the reality, I think, is you don't get to choose one or the other. Reactive work is just part of the nature of our job. Where we see programs really evolve is when they start to treat that work as insights. So as I mentioned earlier, looking at trends and patterns and using that data as insights. So every call, every issue, every follow-up is telling you something about that, where that access is breaking down. So instead of just closing the loop and moving on, we start asking, those mature programs start asking, are we seeing this more than we should? You know, that's where documentation and that regular review do matter. Once we start asking whether something is a one-off or is it part of a larger trend, that reactive work becomes a source of strategy. That's how programs start getting ahead of problems instead of just responding to them. So you're learning as you go and you're starting to get ahead of the next issue before it even scales.
Thank you, Kim. My next question for you guys. How do you determine whether a brand should start with virtual, hybrid, or in-person FRMs?
Yeah, I think Patrick did a great job kind of walking through the differences between them all. But I think you usually start by asking a simple question of where are the biggest barriers and how are providers working day to day? If the success depends on building those strong relationships or hands-on education, so like from the LTC perspective, then in-person probably tends to matter more. If it's about responsiveness or broader coverage, so say you have a program that's got large territories, then that virtual can go a long way because they're not spending a lot of time, a lot of windshield time. They're able to make more calls. But what we see most often, though, is that it's not either or, it's sometimes a mix of both. Rather than trying to get it perfect upfront, we encourage the brands to be flexible and start with a focused approach. Can always change as you're going along, but keep in mind what's most important. And then once the program is live, you learn quickly where are those gaps that you need. So I referenced it in one of my examples earlier where we saw a gap was there were a lot of people in the field and we wanted a dedicated week for them to be virtual to really focus on a specific task. That flexibility, that's when you can start adjusting, shifting coverage, changing the mix, and then really building something that fits that real world demand.
Yeah, and you would also thinking about the drug that that you're supporting. Where is that in the life cycle? Is that a new to market drug? Is that an existing drug? Is it established? Like, where is it? Because that makes a huge difference. And also, what is the prescriber population that is likely to prescribe this? Does this group, are they familiar with the PA process, like Kim mentioned there? And if the answer to that is no, then virtual might not make as much sense because there's going to be a bit of a learning curve that an in-person FRM can help shepherd them to the education, which would then breed that confidence that would allow them to move forward. So it really is tailoring it for what are the biggest barriers, as Kim mentioned, that you are expecting with this drug. And then as the program matures, we'll make adjustments based on what needs to be, what insights we're seeing and what needs to happen next. And that's where the agility becomes so important.
And when you say territory level impact reporting, what insights are included and how does that guide FRM deployment?
Yeah, great question. So there's a lot of things that are included there. At a baseline, we're looking at the prior authorization activities, some of the outcomes, the denials, the appeals, turnaround times, and even workload across the team. And we're able to then compare that from one region to another. And so what that does is it allows us to highlight pockets where things are getting stuck or highlight trends and able to better isolate things that, potentially we see them as one-offs. But when we're looking at it at a territory level, you can then say, okay, that's not a one-off. That is a growing trend in this area. Is there anywhere else that is experiencing it? If yes, this is how we need to, plan on a national scale. If no, then maybe we need to drill down regionally and we can provide those insights to the client, and then their market access team can work with the appropriate groups to help define what does this strategy looks like. So it really allows you to stop guessing on where people need to go or what work is most valuable, and really allows you to make those decisions based on things like submission rate or the number of PAs that are what we call escalated, so without a touch by the prescriber in set amount of time. So it really allows you to make data-based decisions and then follow the journey of those decisions and make adjustments where you need to.
The next question I have for you, what types of trends do FRMs catch earlier than hub or vendor data?
Another great question. So I think I mentioned a little bit earlier when we were talking about the difference between noise and signal. With our FRMs, because they can see each PA and they're seeing what's going on with each PA, they are able to look at things, and if it is a one-off, they can identify it. If it is a trend, they can identify it because they have eyes on all of them. When we're talking about the larger groups or like a hub or the vendor data, typically that is not, it's not in real time or doesn't have that same personal touch as being able to see. Our FRMs are constantly sharing information within the team. I saw this on this pair. Is this what you expected to see? Or, there was this particular change that happened. Are you also seeing that? And because our teams are working so well together and are looking at each individual PA, we find out normally ahead of the manufacturer if something odd is going on, if criteria is being interpreted differently, or if there's something that we need to make an adjustment to and make them aware of, or do we need to, it has a PA champion changed and we need to change the way that we go to that office. Does that office need another visit? Those types of things that really give you the chance to respond to small issues before they become bigger issues.
My next question for you, what does effective communication look like between brand teams and outsource FMMs?
Yeah, I'll take that one. So I think the best way that I've seen it works is we're not feeling like two separate teams. We really feel like an extension of the program and of the brand. And that starts when I talked about earlier is building that trust and understanding. There's a shared understanding of what we're trying to solve for, and the communication is consistent, not just in cadence, but in quality. So for example, when you have a brand new launch, you're probably touching base multiple times a week. It's a brand new program. You want to be really in tune. And then as you get to be, the program gets to be more mature, you're backing off and you're maybe doing weekly or every other week. But it is that constant communication and making sure that they're aligned with what is happening with their brand. They know what's going on. It's not just updates going one way. It's having a real conversation. What are we seeing? What's changing? What do we need to adjust? We're constantly having those conversations about what we're seeing from our end, making suggestions, and that's why we ask for that flexibility. We want that ability to not just have important conversations, but that level of trust where I can be candid about what's going on. If something's not working, we're going to talk about it directly, and we're going to talk about it early so that we can figure out what might work. When that's in place, the communication becomes a lot more than reporting. It becomes how the program actually gets better over time.
Yeah, ultimately, the goal is to help the patients get the medications they need to live healthy lives. So the communication becomes paramount if we're keeping the patient at the core of what the work that we're doing.
Absolutely.
Awesome. Well, thank you, Patrick and Kim. We appreciate your time and your expertise on today's topic. I also like to give a big thank you to our sponsor, Cover My Meds, as well as everyone in the audience. We appreciate your attention and participation. Within the next 24 hours, you'll receive a personalized follow-up email with details and a link to today's presentation on demand. Please feel free to invite your colleagues and peers who may not have been able to listen to today's event. This webinar is copyright 2026 by Informa, and the presentation materials are owned by or copyrighted by Informa. The speakers are solely responsible for their content and their opinions. On behalf of our guests, Kim and Patrick, and Cover My Meds, I'm Brandy Fiddler. Thank you for your time and have a great day.
Thank you, Brandy.
Thank you, Brandy.